Energy is a very interesting topic of conversation. If you look back maybe 100, 120 odd years ago, we were getting from A to B in steam trains and horse and cart. Steam was an amazing revelation. Electricity came on the scene and it was pioneering, I suppose, the ever-evolving world of energy as we know it today. I thought it would be interesting to speak to some people within the energy field, within different sectors, to break down the future of energy and to figure out what energy actually looks like on both a micro scale, being residential homes, community areas, things like that, right up to the macro scale when we're talking about energy conglomerates, energy suppliers, fuel sources, things like solar farms, wind farms, basically anything that combats what traditionally we would look at energy today as, basically coal and things like that. So I've done just that. I've gone out and I've spoken to a few different colleagues, a few different people that are in different areas of the energy field. And the reason I've done that is because I appreciate that so many of you guys are in pretty much every way related or have some sort of relationship with energy to a degree, whether you're a builder, whether you're an electrician, you might be a plumber or whatever it is, but it does kind of dictate the future of our trades. I mean, if you think of electricians, looking forward, there's this massive push now over the last 20 odd years towards solar. And so, that's been a big segue for a lot of electricians and of course then builders, because builders have to be the ones that build the houses that have the solar panels on them and all this kind of stuff. So it's really interesting, I think, when you look at the future of energy and where it's potentially heading, so we can, I suppose, maybe not foresee, but certainly take into consideration the fact that we are in an evolving space and there is a load of energy sources out there that may not be mainstream yet, but potentially could well be. So it's a 3-part series, and in the first series we're talking a lot on that macro scale. We're talking about energy from a grid perspective. In the second episode we're talking about energy that's fueling communities, and specifically we're talking about a lot of solar there. And then in the last episode we're talking about the residential scale, so homes and those homes that would fit into the communities that would form part of the grid. So it's a pretty interesting topic. I'm sure you guys will get a lot out of it. And by all means, if you have any questions or if you've got any experiences with anything to do with these topics that we speak about, by all means, contribute. We'd love to have you part of the conversation. Head across to the Facebook community and you can join the conversation there, or better still, you can start the conversation. There's thousands and thousands of people in that group from all over the world, and everyone's got some amazing experience. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. Anyway, that's enough from me. Let's jump in, enjoy this podcast, enjoy this series, and we look forward to hearing your feedback. Hello there, listeners, and welcome to Toolbox Talks on the Such Said podcast. Today, you are joining us for the first episode in the Future of Energy series that I have put together to get a bit of an overview as to different areas of the energy sector and how that might affect us as tradies and contractors around the world. In this episode today, I'm speaking with my friend and colleague, Andrew, who has spent pretty much his entire career in the energy sector from a grid perspective. So working from some of the major conglomerates around the world. He spent a lot of time trading energy and working on that grid scale, so the supply scale of the energy sector. And there has been some huge segues in that space. And I think you'll all be extremely interested to hear what Andrew has to say. Coming from the traditional energy background where, you're typically talking about gas, coal, oil, that kind of thing. I think you'll be quite interested to hear where the future of that looks like it's heading. So enjoy this episode. It is part 1, and there's 2 more to follow. And so the ones that follow will be slightly different. One of them is going to be talking about the community scale of energy, and the other one's going to be talking about the residential scale. So I hope you enjoy this, guys. And if you do, please leave me some comments or reviews. It would be very much appreciated. You can do that over at iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Google, wherever you guys whatever you have access to, really. Anyway, enjoy this podcast. It is a lot of fun. It was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure you guys will too. That's all from me. Bye-bye. It is with an insane amount of joy that I come to you today saying that this podcast is proudly brought to you by the Sightshed's Surf and Learn program. That's right. This year, we are running our second Surf and Learn program over in the Maldives off the back of the hugely successful Surf and Learn 2018 program that we ran. It was so much fun. I cannot even begin to explain how cool these events are. We basically take a group of enthusiasts, if you will, across to the Maldives. We live on a luxury yacht, motor yacht, for 10 days, and we basically live the high life. We surf, we eat like kings, we drink if that's your thing, you can fish, you can do whatever you want, you can go scuba diving, all that crazy stuff. And in the evenings, we do a business workshop. So it is a tax-deductible trip, and it is just the most amazing experience ever. Last year was mind-bogglingly good. Anyway, obviously, we're taking a boat, and boats have limited seats. So if you want to come to this event, you need to head across to the sightshed.com/events, click on the Surf and Learn 2019 link, and go to the landing page there where you can secure your spot, or you can find out more information about the event. These tickets will go quickly. There's a huge percentage of the guys that came last year want to come again, and for reasons which you will see on the landing page. It is absolutely fantastic. The direct landing page is the sightshed.com/surf2019 if you want to go straight there. It is just amazing, guys. I really hope to see you there. The content's brilliant. The networking's fantastic. The location and the experience is like nothing you will ever experience. I can tell you, it is just brilliant. Anyway, that's all from me. I hope to see you there, and enjoy the podcast.
Giving tradies and contractors around the globe the tools to run a modern business. You're listening to Toolbox Talks from the Sightshed. Now here's your host, Matt Jones.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to Toolbox Talks and the Sightshed podcast, where you are joining me, Matt Jones, today for an exciting episode because, as many of you know, if you've been following the show for a while, I am a bit of a greenie, and I am pretty interested in the space of energy and sustainable, renewable, blah, blah, blah. And the future of it, I think, is quite an exciting prospect. And I've got today a friend of mine, Andrew, who has spent the last 15 years in the field of effectively energy trading, and he's coming along to talk to us about, I suppose, some of the current model around energy, some of the disruptive patterns that are coming into the energy space, and then looking forward, the future of energy and where that could potentially end up, if we keep going on the track we are on. Andrew, welcome.
Thanks, buddy. And so, Matt, I like to describe myself as energy agnostic. I get you're a bit of a greenie. I think that's beautiful. I'm a fan of going in that direction. I'm a believer in what's the right technology for the right mix at the right time, and what's good for society. Like, what does society want, and what's society willing to pay for, right?
So, Andrew, we've been mates for a long time, and we've been talking about doing these podcasts for a long time as well. And I suppose it's all come into fruition at the right time because, obviously, as you know, we've got a huge audience of like tradespeople, electricians, builders, plumbers, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. Our guys that are in development. So, going back to go back to the sort of engineering or maybe architectural sort of side of things, and they'd all be super interested in the future of this energy movement that seems to be so in our faces at the moment. And to be fair, I think it's fantastic. I love the way that it's all heading down, down the path of solar, renewable energy, and all these wind farms, all this kind of stuff popping up. But I appreciate as well that there's a number of different conversations that have to happen here on a number of different levels. And I suppose today I'm speaking to you on the level of somebody that's sort of coming at it from a macro perspective. I mean, you've been in the energy field for a long time, and you've been sort of on the higher level side of things in the space of the way that we receive energy, gas, electricity, all that kind of stuff. So what we're actually doing is I'm speaking with a number of different people. I'm speaking with yourself, who's sort of at that level. Then I'm going to be speaking with another fellow who's going to be talking a little bit more about the community side of things, which I know you've got some good insight to as well. Then I'm trying as well to actually speak to some guys on the installation level to see that some of the problems that they may be facing in the space of government rebates and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, mate, thanks for your time. I'm really looking forward to this.
So, and that's fantastic. It's a great entry, actually, because you know what? It's actually going to affect everyone. Like, I get that it's the topic of the day because everyone's, it's kind of become an important political topic and important for our society as well, about, making value judgments about how we consume it, how we produce it, where's the fossil fuels, what's our opinion on carbon, all that kind of stuff. But I just think the thing why it's really good, to be doing this right now is I'm kind of, in between jobs. That's good. But B, as well, from my perspective, is that I can actually see that the way that we consume energy and the way that our grid's set up and everything else is actually fundamentally changing right now. And it's changing whether we want to or not. It's changing, I think, for the better in a lot of ways, but there's going to be some serious engineering changes, and they're going to affect trades. They're going to affect everyone. So it's actually a really fascinating time to kind of to be involved in energy, and it's fascinating because a lot of the interesting things are actually kind of just sitting beneath the surface, and they're going to pop up. Like, how you say, oh, well, I want energy, right? Like, and I love all the green stuff and blah, blah, blah. And I think we all do. One of the things I would just point out to you is interesting is that the challenge around the green energy is that when the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow, you've got to have a backup. And that's, it could be battery, it could be a coal-fired power station, it could be water coming from, does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. And I suppose it's, I know, and I'm sure we're going to dive into this as we go, but, when we talk about, some of the current models, which you've just alluded to, which include a lot of your typical fossil style fuels, there's a lot of coal, there's a lot of gas, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's also a lot of awareness now around, like you were saying, even at a political level of, I suppose, people wanting to move away from that. And to be honest with you, I don't even know, like maybe it's just ignorance and we just like the sound of it more than we actually understand it, which I'm hoping you can address, because I know sometimes, it sometimes sounds all rainbows and unicorns to a lot of us, but the reality is far from it. So, I'm curious, with that current model, which is so heavily geared towards, and in Australia as well. I don't know. I've traveled to a number of places and I've sort of seen there seems to be a larger initiative towards moving into those sustainable style fuel structures. And I feel like, and I could be wrong, here in Australia, we seem to be not as advanced in certain areas as some of our, Scandinavian friends and those sort of countries. But what's your take on that?
Yeah, and great question, because I would say that, don't sell the Aussies short. We're going to do things in Australia that are going to be world first. We're going to have to integrate a lot of renewable generation into our grid, and we're going to have to solve engineering problems that no one else has faced. Now, the flip side of that is I'd give you some serious stick, especially to the builders out there, for all those guys out there who put in single pane windows. What the hell were you thinking? I come from a different place. I'm not going to point out where it is, but all I'm going to say to you builders out there is that my house, in my old country, was much cooler in summer, much warmer in winter. I didn't have to deal with freaking tradies banging at 7 a.m. with their saws and stuff, because I don't know why that's a trend here. Why do you have to get the bandsaw out at like 7 a.m.? Do some quiet work till 8 until I've gone to work. But having those double pane windows that keep the insulation in, really a lot of forethought, that goes into construction of housing, how it heats up, how it cools down, what the kind of the environment is around the house, that kind of stuff, the wind. So there's a lot to do with building that goes into the consumption of energy, because energy is consumed in the community mostly through heating and cooling. Right. Your TV, how those old TVs that you could sit in front of and kind of get like you could roast a hot dog or whatever. That's not the case anymore, right? Like that TV does not use that much energy anymore, your new TVs. Many of your appliances aren't as energy hungry as they once were. I'm obviously dryers. I don't know. Does anyone own a dryer in Australia?
You know what? I've got a dryer. I'm not quite sure how to turn it on, but it's funny what you say.
Exactly. I've got a Hill Toys, right? I got a Hill Toys. I don't know exactly how to turn that on either, but I'm figuring it out.
We bought a fridge today that had like an energy consumption thing on it, and to be honest, I I wouldn't even know. Like if you gave me something that had a 3-star energy rating and put it next to something that had a 4-star energy rating, I wouldn't even really know what that means, apart from the fact that it sounds better to be 4-star. So we went with that and paid more for it.
Yeah. And I would say, like, I was kind of looking at this because this is my industry. This has been my baby for, I've been trading energy for 15 years now, and being on the front page is not cool. I think you've lost your social license when you end up there. It's not cool. And I go, well, why is it, like, are the bills that bad? And then I look at my own bill, which isn't as nasty, but I go, I feel like I screw up more with my phone bill and all my different various devices, broadband, than I do with my energy bill. So maybe that's just me personally. But it feels like that. And what gets me, the biggest one is my freaking private Medicare bill. I mean, I don't know what those guys provide, but I'm like, that's a much bigger bill than my energy bill. So why is the energy bill the one that everyone's, in on? And I don't feel like they're getting value for money. Maybe that's what it is. They're just going, why is it getting expensive? We've got lots of energy here in Australia. This is our legacy, our cultural legacy. So what's going on?
Yeah.
And I think
it kind of raises it's a bit of a segue, but it raises a point. When we talk about, all these other things and, the consideration around, the difference between, energy efficiency and carbon footprint. And you look at things like phone bills, like you just mentioned, and all these other, Medicare tariffs and blah, blah, blah. And then you look at, I suppose, what's the carbon relationship to that? And you put that in perspective towards energy consumption. And it is kind of a tangent, but it is kind of relevant at the same time, right?
Yeah, well, and if we want to cause controversy, which I love, right? Like one of my favorite things is I go, I want a greener future, but I want it to be a real green future. I want the real deal. So I want something that is truly less carbon. And it's not about less carbon here just in Australia. I want it like life cycle. So if you build a wind turbine in Spain, right? Okay, it takes a lot of metal, takes a lot of, fossil fuels that go into building that wind turbine, right? Then you have to ship the thing across the world. All right.
Or if you're in Australia, you've got to ship it to China and then ship it back from China once it's actually steel.
Maybe, right? Like I honestly don't even know. I'm not that smart, but I know that there's a lot of stuff going involved, right? Yeah. And then once it's here, you probably got to put it on a bunch of like big ass trucks. Yeah. And transport the thing again. And then you got to stick it up. Yeah. Okay. So if you try to take you're creating carbon by doing that whole process, all right? Whether you like it or not. Now, at some point, you're going to end up carbon neutral, right? So it will produce a certain amount of electricity at some point, which will get you back to a carbon neutral position.
But is that taking into account how much energy and carbon's been spent in order to get it from point A to point B, to which at point B where you start measuring it?
Yeah, and that's where I'm like, people like to measure, they'd like to say, okay, well, it's green, it's not putting any exhaust out, that's great. And it is, right? That is really great. But don't forget that someone had to mine that thing, all the materials that went into it, right? And someone had to transport that thing and build that thing. And the effort to make something new requires carbon. And at some point, hopefully it won't. At some point, you'll have enough renewable energy where potentially, but that you won't have to use fossil fuels to create the renewable energy things.
Right.
But you're still going to have to mine, right?
It's kind of an oxymoron, eh?
Well, it's like moving the problem. Like when people say they love batteries, and I say I absolutely adore batteries, but there's two things. My favorite battery is water, because I go, well, water, you can drink it, hopefully if it's been desalinated or it's fresh, and it doesn't have the kind of, you don't have to mine for rare earth minerals, right? Which is a very, very intensive mining process, which a bunch of kids in Mongolia are probably not a fan of what's happening to the environment there to create these batteries that make us happy here. And the batteries only last X number of years, call it 8 years. And then what do you do with them after that?
Right.
And so for bang for your buck, is it there now? What I would say is you want to use that technology because the technology is something you're excited by, and the battery's got unique capabilities to it, which you're like, okay, well, this is the right idea, but don't think it's a free lunch.
So the irony really is, yeah, sure, you can move away from using fossil fuels, which take up a lot of mining, and then you can move it towards something like mining for lithium, which is effectively going towards sustainable batteries, scenarios. However, you're still mining for it.
Yeah, and you're destroying someone else's environment, maybe somewhere else in the world potentially to do that. So and so just look at the whole. And I'm not like what I would say to any of your listeners there. I'm not judging. The only people I was judging are the builders that build with single pane windows. I'm judging you. So who you are, I'm judging you. And the guys who start construction at 7 a.m. with the bandsaw, I'm judging you too, because I think you can use the bandsaw a little later in the day. That's all I'm saying. But I'm not judging technology. Like, I'm not judging. What I want to do is I want to be not clouded by my politics. I want to look at the entire life cycle of something. Answer, right? Does that make sense?
It makes sense. So I think you've touched on something here, like while you're trying to make a joke, but not really.
Yeah.
You're talking about the education space alone. And when you look at, the progression of things like building these days, now we're seeing that those kind of things that, back in North America, you guys have been doing, and throughout Europe, they've been doing in, for the last 50, 60, 70, 100 years. And we started to think, oh, maybe we should put double pane windows in, or maybe we should, north-facing houses. Or maybe,
and what else? Builders, it costs less money to build it over there. I'm not saying I'm from North America. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that if I was, it costs a lot less money to build that house, and it's a lot nicer. Just saying. You
sort of gave it away when you said house then, but anyway.
Yeah, well.
All right, cool. So, so we're currently running off a model which is heavily geared towards, gas, coal, etc.
Yeah.
We run off a lot of gas, which basically fuels appliances and all this kind of stuff. Now,
it's a grid model, right? Like it's a smart model. It goes basically, look, we don't know how to do this thing on small scale because it's expensive. But, in the olden days, big scale made a lot of sense, right? Like what we can do is we can produce it in places where there's a resource. So like you're going to have a coal-fired power station. You know what you do? You build your coal-fired power station next to a mine, right? You literally put a conveyor belt. You dig the coal up, you stick it on a conveyor belt. It goes over to the power station, which is around the corner. You oil it up, and you create steam, and you create power, and off you go. And then you get these big lines, these huge KV lines, and they go ripping from wherever that power station is into your demand centers, which are pretty far, usually far away from your power stations. And that whole model works at scale, right? Like if you ever see a coal-fired power station, they are massive things, and very complex, and they're very expensive to run, and they break a lot,
right?
Because it's like just think of tubes going in every direction and just all kinds of bits that can go wrong. Tricky stuff.
So how is that model now? I suppose that's been around for 100, 150 years, right? I mean, that's just the way it's always been. Coal gas, yeah.
Yeah, and get to your point. Like, I think you hit on a really good point. Like, people say that humanity, the Industrial Revolution, is built off energy. Everything is built off the ability of humans to harness energy and then convert it into, things and society. Like society kind of runs off energy. That there's a some people say that the price of oil, when the price of oil gets too high, you end up with recessions. And when the price of oil is lower, it spurs economic growth. Like energy is what makes everything kind of go. I mean, I guess that's obvious, but at the same time, I don't know if we realize how, because we've just taken it for granted that we've got it.
Yeah.
But if you think about economies where you don't have access to cheap and easy energy, like say rural India or Africa, your ability to produce goods or services or anything really is more constrained. I mean, that's the theory. I mean, I'm happy to be told that that's not the case, but it seems like that might be the case.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So then, if we look at, I suppose, that's obviously the way that it's been for a long time. And look, I mean, are we in any likelihood of running out of oil or gas? Let's just talk about Australia, for instance. I mean, is that going to run out? I mean, how much resource is there?
Yeah, good question. So gas is an interesting one. Gas, there's a lot of gas in Australia. You've heard coal seam gas. Have you? Yeah. It seems like that's a popular topic. Well, and they call it fracking. I mean, I describe it as they shoot water down into coal seams to break up the coal. And when the coal kind of gets broken apart, it releases a gas.
And in the meantime, ruins the Great Barrier Reef.
Well, that's the theory, I guess. I don't know. Like, I'm not going to comment on any, I have absolutely no opinions on that. I do know that like I say, coal seam gas. What I find interesting is that the coal seam gas is one of the resources that we have been utilizing in Australia. We do have offshore fields as well. And offshore fields are different. What they are is it's basically a bunch of gas trapped inside a bunch of rock, and you stick a straw into it, and then out it comes, right? And that could be under the seafloor bed or, in a rock formation, say in the center of Australia. We do have lots of gas. There's places you can't drill for it.
Right.
Like Victoria. There's some gas in the Northern Territories. There's tons of gas in Western Australia. And then it's all about transporting it. So, I mean, I would go back to your builders. Like, one of the things I think is interesting is, well, getting access to cheap gas here on the east coast of Australia is tricky because the cheap gas has probably mostly been used. It's more expensive to drill for it where you can. And if you had to bring the cheaper gas, you have to bring it from farther away, which costs money too. So I think electricity gets cheaper and cheaper because a lot of it's being produced more inexpensively, potentially, like in terms of, and so sorry, and I should probably backtrack a little bit here, but do you understand the difference between energy and capacity?
Not really.
Yeah, and that gets confused a lot. And what I would say is that energy, when I say energy, I just mean like basically the amount of, it's like the amount of fuel you use in your car, right? Which I would call gas and you would call petrol. Mm-hmm. How much it takes, the tank is the capacity, but how much you use is the energy, if you like.
Okay.
And we're going to have lots of energy in Australia. We have tons of energy with the renewables coming on, everything else. We have just we'll have a lot of energy. Capacity is going to be tricky because all that energy is going to show up at the same time or at different times. And it may not just mirror our consumption. So, again, it's like when the sun shines, you're going to get a lot of energy. That energy is going to be there. And the wind blows. You know what I mean?
Yep.
The problem is that in South Australia, say, when it's really, really hot, when consumption jumps to the roof and everyone turns their air cons on, the sun's shining, hopefully, but the wind might not be blowing. That's when it's really stinking hot, right?
Yeah.
And then what happens is like, when do you turn up your air conditioning? When you really start to your energy is usually late in the day. It's probably like 4 till like 6 o'clock or something. You know what I mean? You get home and you're like, it's freaking hot. I'm over there. I'm turning it all on. I'm out with this. Well, the trick with that is that the sun is going down in the sky, right? The heat's still going up, but the sun's going down. So you're getting less output out of your solar panels.
But with that said, I mean, you're at work and you're in the same scenario, right? You got the aircon cranked. Like, it's not like you wait till you get home and it happens.
No, true. Actually, that's a good point. But the peak, I guess I'm trying to describe
residential level.
The peak in the energy markets that I see is usually like that. Like you get, it's almost like I always compare it to jumps, like in bicycle jumps. And I say, well, a summer peak of demand looks kind of like a big tabletop. Like it builds from the morning, it goes across the middle of the day, and it's solid, right?
Yeah.
Demand starts at, I don't know, let's call it 10 in the morning, and it just keeps going. And it goes till maybe 5, 6 o'clock at night, and then it comes right off.
Right.
Makes sense. Well, because you got solar panels, as that demand turns on, the sun's there, right? So it kind of, you don't see the demand because the people's panels on the top roofs of their houses are actually kind of hiding their demand. Mm-hmm. Because they're not pulling from the grid so hard. You know what I mean? Because they're actually getting the power from their own panels, which is really great. And that continues all throughout the day. But then as the sun starts to go down, they get less power out of that.
Yep.
Potentially their consumption's still going solid.
Yeah, okay.
So it shows up as a big blip, right? And then somebody else has got to fill that in.
So effectively, what you're saying is the consumption and the capacity is completely relative.
Yeah, and there's a relationship between the two, and different scenarios call for different kinds of technologies and different kind of mixes, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's a number of different ways. And this is the thing I'd stress is there's so many different ways to solve it. And you're going to get from the original grid model was just have these big power stations that can ramp up and down, right? So yeah, you want more. Okay. They ramp up more. And, power has to always match demand at all moments. That's the electricity. That's how the way the grid works to maintain voltage and frequency.
Yeah.
But, and so that was easy. You know what I mean? Like I think it kind of worked really well. The trick became is that when the demand would drop off, say a cloud would come over, right? And you lose a whole bunch of residential solar or even large scale solar, which we're getting now. Then you have to fill that in. or a big coal-fired power station trips, just falls off because they do snap from time to time. You got to fill that in with something else. So there's a lot of redundancy you try to build in because you just want to keep the whole thing going because it's an essential service, right?
Right. So I can kind of see where you're heading with this, and I'm interested to dive into this a little more. So, we're talking about now, and this is something that's been evident to me over the last maybe 5 or 10 years, the trend towards, harvesting, right? So we're talking about things like solar harvesting, maybe wind harvesting through wind farms or solar panels and all that kind of stuff. But it seems like the disconnect and the problem until recently, which it's still not there, in my opinion, and I don't know, you probably have a far better understanding of this than I, but it seems like the future of solar and the success is really going to be largely based on the development in the storage place.
Absolutely. And that's why batteries are so exciting to people, because it's just so easy to store it, right?
So currently, if somebody's got a house with solar panels on the roof, and correct me if I'm wrong here, a lot of those solar panels are harvesting energy and then putting that energy back into the grid, which then they're getting credits for, which come off their energy bill. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's accurate. And it's also, it's negating their own use of that energy as well, right? So
they're using the energy as well, or they're not using the energy?
I mean, you'd be sitting in your house, your solar panels would hopefully just blasting along, and you're like, I'm going to crank up my air conditioning. I'm in a great spot right now. It's not costing me any money. I've already sunk cost on this.
Right.
I'm good. Right. And maybe I'm still exporting to the grid and making money. And that's just fantastic. That's great. That's really great. And by the way, like solar panel prices have come down. Like I imagine your buddies have been installing them left, right, and center. And from my perspective, I can see the penetration of solar panels on the roofs of houses it's massive.
Yeah.
It's changing the shape of the Australian grid. It's got lots of benefits and it's got a couple of drawbacks. Like one drawback is we call it scheduled or unscheduled generation. And what that means is if it's a big power station, right? I can tell it what I want it to do, and I can tell it'll tell me it's going to do it, and I can believe it's going to be there. And unless something weird happens, it's just going to chug along, right?
Yep. We interrupt this podcast today to talk to you very quickly about Tradie Web Guy's content creation program. That program has been designed specifically for trade-based organizations as a way that you guys as trade business owners can start creating content that enables you to engage better with your customers and your potential customers. It will enable you to build trust and build rapport, because what you're doing is you're investing in educating them. Biggest problem that we see with our customers today is that they're not regularly updating their websites. And that's a problem because, first of all, the search engines are looking for that. And second of all, potential customers are also looking for it. Tradie Web Guy's content creation program has been specifically designed to help you get regular, relevant content on your website consistently every month. We know that it's hard when you're out there on the tools, and we know that sometimes you don't always have the time to be able to do these things yourself. So we're taking it off your hands for you. It's a service that we're offering for you guys. We want to make sure that you're getting this done because we know how important it is. Anyway, head across to tradiewebguys.com.au/content, fill in the form, and one of our representatives will come back to you.
A wind farm will potentially just go, look, I don't know when I'm going to be there because it's really hard to actually figure out, right?
Right.
But I hope to be there, and when I turn on, I'm just going to turn on. So I'm off and running, and what I put out is what I put out, and when I stop, I stop, which is really hard if you're trying to, you're like, okay, well, what happens if you do stop suddenly? And there's a whole bunch of you. Like, again, this is what I think about with rooftop solar. I'm like, well, okay, say a bunch of clouds go over South Australia or whatever. All those panels all of a sudden shot off at the same time. So maybe they're all pumping into the grid, and it's bigger than you're getting more megawatts out of them. And we talk in megawatts.
Yeah.
More megawatts than, say, the biggest power station in South Australia. I don't think we're there yet, but at some point that could potentially happen, right? Well, now if you're an operator, you might be a little worried about that because you're like, okay, well, it's all working right now, but if this cloud comes over, what do I replace it with?
Right.
Because there's only two ways to solve that. One is you could shut off demand, which isn't what we like to do, right? Because again, I see this as an essential service. The flip side is you got to find another source to back it out. And a battery is good because it's instantaneous, but to replace that amount, well, it's pretty tricky. I mean, it's a lot. So what I would say from a builder perspective, what would be interesting is in the future, I would hope that not only are we going to have these solar panels on the roof, but yeah, you might have a battery pack in your house. Or maybe it's a car. Maybe it's your solar, your electric car, sorry. And it's plugged into your house or plugged into wherever. And it's drawing, because what happens when your actual power, or what happens when the amount of energy being produced by houses in the middle of the day, or like wind farms or whatever, exceeds the amount of demand. So in other words, there's too much power.
Yeah.
What do you do then? It'd be great to store it and save it for another day or for later in the day.
And does that happen? Like, so with electricity, do you get that surplus?
Great question. Not yet, but it's coming. It's
right.
Coming. Yeah.
So that's sort of counter.
Think of Christmas Day. Think of Christmas Day, right?
Yeah.
Christmas Day, it's going to be hot, but not too hot, maybe.
Yeah.
Everyone's out drinking tinnies and doing their thing, so no one's really using that much energy. There's no businesses really turned on. Like most businesses are turned off. Most offices are turned off.
Yeah.
But the sun's shining, right? Mm-hmm. And if it's a windy day as well, there's a good chance you could have more supply than you have demand in a particular region. So it's got to balance everywhere, right?
Right.
So that could be pretty tricky.
So that's an interesting point. I never really thought of that. Like when they're harvesting or creating electricity today, obviously, they're whatever it is through water or turbines or whatever.
Yeah.
If there's at any point, electricity that's not being drawn off, is it effectively just getting earthed, or is it getting stored somewhere?
Well, they have to balance it. So I mean, and I'm not. Again, I'm a trader. I don't give a
trader
crap about the detail sometimes. But it tries to balance it. And what the operator would do is they try to go, okay, well, if there's too much out of this power station, I'll just turn them down. Do you know what I mean? I'll just mess it up, turn down the volume. It gets tricky when you have things that you can't turn down, or it's weird to turn down, right? Because like the wind farms, like, oh well, but they turn their blades basically into the wind slightly, so they kind of feather it. So they put a different output out. But a rooftop solar, how do you get your Aunt Dolly's house to turn down?
Well, I mean, I would have thought surely it's a matter of, you can, like, if it's being drawn on, like something would switch and it would actually start putting power in, whereas it would just sit there dormant and otherwise.
Yeah, and I don't know the answer, right? But I would say, from your perspective, someone's going to have to install something at some point, which is going to do that.
Okay. So now that we're sort of moving in towards this whole conversation around storage as opposed to harvesting, harvesting's been around for a long time. A lot of people are doing it. Whether or not they're doing it in the most productive or economical way is probably something that, that's obviously going to be the space where we're going to see a lot of movement, a lot of evolution looking forward. Now, on a residential level at the moment, you're starting to see things like batteries installed into homes. You're starting to see cars that are electrically powered. And it's going to come to a point where I suppose, there's going to be entire offices maybe that are running off, battery systems as opposed to the typical electrical, model. The question that I have is, if somebody starts employing these systems into their home, solar panels, etc., and, there's the conglomerates out there which effectively control or currently supply energy to these people, surely they must be sweating, thinking, holy shit, like if these people go off the grid, we're screwed.
Yeah, and I wouldn't know what they think, obviously. But so I only can tell you what I think. But I think their model has to change, right? Like because again, I still believe energy will be pretty pretty free. We're going through a really painful period. That's why it's expensive, because it's a transition period and no one knows we're trying to integrate different technologies and try to move towards the future. And we're doing it a bit higgledy-piggledy. And so it's a bit tricky. But
and is that because of the new technologies or the disruptions that are coming into play?
Yeah, it's the whole shebang-a-bang, right? Like you got a bunch of old coal-fired power stations And even if they don't retire, right, they're still old and they break. You have wind is fairly inexpensive and has been subsidized in this country, and same with solar. And solar is really nice and modular as well, so you can kind of put as much in as you like. And so that's coming in, and then it's just again balancing that out, and then demand is kind of dropping away maybe a little bit. And so all those changes are occurring at the same time, whereas you have this grid and these people trying to balance it. It's disrupting, right? Like that's why the power station, the one power station that turned off, I think the French power station in Victoria, like maybe there wasn't much of a model there for them, or maybe they weren't interested in the carbon. I'm not sure what their reasons were, but as those things come out of the system, or as people don't feel like they're making money, that has a step change. So it's balancing those step changes with these, what I'd say is pretty good. I mean, the value in renewables is they're pretty inexpensive to build nowadays. They're pretty good.
But I mean, yeah, okay. But I suppose, like you say, the issue's not so much like the issue's really going to be at what point does it come? Does it become commonplace? And when can people start to, I suppose, install these solutions or technologies into their home?
Yeah.
And it effectively, if not removes them, certainly puts a pretty big gap in between what they're currently doing from, a commercial level and buying electricity from typical suppliers as to, okay, well, I'm off the grid now. I don't need you. I can do my own thing.
Yeah, screw you guys, right? And
right.
And that would make sense. And also you'd pay a bit of a premium where you're like, you know what, I don't want to be browned out. I don't want my power to go out. I don't want to have to deal with that. If I've got my own battery pack, okay,
yeah,
a bit expensive, but I got my solar panels, I got my battery pack. You know what? I'm good. I can deal with it. And so I could see the allure of that, right? And I just see, like, again, what I'd say to you is if you're a place like India or Africa and you don't have the established grid like we do, maybe these rural areas, are they going to go to a different model? Do you know what I mean? Are they going to skip that stage and kind of go to a different, and I don't know what it is. Maybe it's a community. Maybe it's like you have a community solar farm and, everyone comes with maybe there's a change in battery technology and everyone goes and fills up their batteries at this community center, or maybe the community center, you do your cooking and cleaning, everything there, right? Because it has the power. And then you go back to your house. I don't know. I actually have no idea what the future looks like. But I feel like it'll be different. Do you know what I mean? And I feel like you're going to build homes and power systems differently, perhaps, maybe not.
Well, I mean, I think it certainly is the case. And I know, as I mentioned earlier, I've got a gentleman coming on the show who's going to talk a little bit more about that on a community sort of scale, that sort of how that might look. Because at the moment, there are a lot of people out there, who are doing it on their own, individual sort of level. But then when you put that into a community scale, it's got a compounding result. And I can't recall the place that's doing it. I think it might be somewhere in Germany or something, and they've built an entire community, like an entire suburb, which is based off solar. And
it's Dutch, but maybe it is.
Oh, maybe it's Dutch. Yeah.
The Dutch are always up on stuff like that.
But apparently the power they create, or the energy they create, it makes the community so much money, but they can't use it. It goes back into the grid and it supplies the network, and they get rebated for it, which then provides them with resource to, for other things. So it's a really interesting.
But the part of the story that everyone leaves out in Europe is that the backbone of the power supply that creates, power overnight, fixes the problem. It's the fixer in the European power system is French nuclear.
Right. But I mean,
they're always there. You know what I mean? And they're always able to ramp up, ramp down. Do you know what I mean? Like they kind of fix a lot of problems.
Yeah. And that was a question I was going to ask. The whole conversation around uranium, plutonium, nuclear energy. I mean, when you look at, I have absolutely no idea here, so you can just call me up. But I feel like there's a lot of everyone's sort of up in arms about fossil fuels and coals and this kind of stuff, and then you look at the consumption versus output when you employ a uranium sort of style plant. And you think, well, okay, is it better? Like surely it sounds better.
Yeah, as long as it doesn't get hit by a large
tsunami
and then starts leaking into the Pacific Ocean, I think you're good. Right. I don't know. honestly, like I'm again, I hate to say it, but I'm very fuel agnostic. Like I go, well, I want society to be better, and I want the right solution. This is an essential service. What technology gets us there is a question of what society is willing to pay and what it values. Do you know what I mean? Like we want clean air. Like right now in China, the Chinese don't want to burn coal anymore. I mean, and the reason for that is because their air quality was so bad.
Right.
That, they're like, you know what, we've had enough of this. We're going to switch to gas as a transition fuel while we get our renewables and everything else up, because they just didn't want the pollutant. And that makes sense, right? In Australia, we've got more money. We've got choices.
We've got more money than China?
Well, no, we don't. But we're on a per person basis a bit wealthier, right? I don't know. Maybe we're all on credit here. Who knows?
And so I'm curious, like with that sort of model, when they switch from coal to gas, like is that effectively jumping out of the pot into the fire? Or
well, gas is cleaner, right? It burns cleaner, so your air quality is better. It's still a fossil fuel. It's still a limited resource. They call it a transition fuel because they're like, well, it's not really an answer in itself, potentially. But they're using a lot of that gas to create electricity. So we have, and this would be a question I have to you actually. So, in Australia, especially in Victoria, there's a lot of gas-fired appliances, right? Like I have a gas stove at my place, which I love. I love cooking with gas. It's kind of neat. At some point, gas might be more expensive than, just having electrical appliances, because electricity might become really inexpensive. Mm-hmm. Well, does everyone change their appliances? Like, how long does that kind of stuff take? Like, and in China, maybe do they move from, having gas heating, in winter, which a lot of northern countries do, like Canada, the United States, Europe. Do they move to electrification? And do you have to refit all those appliances? And I know your audience is drooling right now, thinking about what that's gonna, bring to their table, right? But I think that could be a real thing, because I think electricity is the future. But I don't know. Maybe it is gas. Like, do you see anything like that? Did you get questions like that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, to be honest, no. But maybe I'm a bit too far removed from it these days. I've been
People don't care. Like when they pick their appliances and their shit in their house, they don't care if it's gas or electric. Really, from a cost point of view, it's just about what they like to cook with. Or
look, I could be wrong. I know when I was plumbing, there was a strong tendency that people would prefer gas as a heat source for things like hot water or cooking on cooktops. And then, obviously electrically you would, things like ovens fine as electric, obviously microwaves, blah, 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 that kind of stuff. Now, I don't know. I know I've cooked on gas and electric, and I think electric sucks. But then, you've got a lot of other technologies that are coming out in that space too. Like there's that, I can't think of what it's called, where you got the, it's crazy technology. It's like basically you get a hot plate, which doesn't actually get hot until you put the right pot on it.
Oh, really?
It's insane. I can't remember what it's called, but one of my friends' parents has it up at their place, and his mum went and basically got all this stuff put in because of all the grandkids that are running around up there, and you can cook, pasta in a matter of seconds. Like it boils water in so fast.
Oh,
and
wow!
You can take the pot straight off and put your hand on it, and it won't burn your hand. Like induction heating, it's called. There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Like it's insane, but. Look, so there's a lot of cool things in that space, but again, that's kind of electricity. But then I think, that whole conversation around like looking forward in the future, like that may well come into play when you're talking about certain things. Yeah. Like, I don't know what that's going to mean for cooking, and I don't know what that's going to mean for, residential appliances. And, can you, if you're running your hot water heater off solar, like then you got to figure out, okay, well, how much energy am I consuming? How much am I storing? How much am I using? Like you were saying before, blah, blah, blah. So I suppose and then, especially on a residential scale, it comes into that, scheduled or unscheduled generation that you were talking about. Like, is there a demand for it? Can we draw off it? Blah, blah, blah. So I suppose there's a lot of things there. You touched on something before. You're talking about subsidies and rebates and, that kind of stuff from a government level. And I know, years and years ago when they introduced solar into residential properties, the government had a lot of rebates there as an incentive for people in Australia or New South Wales anyway to basically go and install all these solar panels and put electricity back into the grid.
Yep.
Then they went and pulled those rebates, and as a result, the solar industry basically fell over. And I know because I've got friends that were doing it. And then since then, they've obviously reinstated it to a degree. But I feel as well like it's kind of a risky thing when you're kind of dependent on, government rebates. So I'm wondering if over time that's going to become less and less relevant as it becomes more and more popular, demand goes up, products come up and get cheaper and cheaper, and it becomes more affordable.
Yeah, great point. I mean, I think a couple of the big energy majors have come out and said, look, I would build renewables anyway, even if you had no, rebate, because, and they're talking large scale, but they're just like, well, it's just cheaper. It's more modular as well, right? Again, you don't have capital intensity is less. So in other words, you don't have to spend so much money up front, and it just makes sense. So, and on a consumer level, yeah, I guess I think it was the government of Spain went not bankrupt, but I think that they had a solar feed-in scheme that was basically costing them the earth. They put a really high number on it, and then everybody kind of went, oh, wait a minute, well, I'm just going to cover my backyard in solar panels and just
right,
enjoy the serenity, right? And the Spanish government had to change the tariff because they realized they were going to go broke from all the amount of solar that was actually being pumped in the system. And again, if you're getting all that solar at the same exact moment and you got too much, well, it's not helpful, right? Unless you can store it.
That's surprising because the Spanish government's got quite a good track record for funds and keep.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and people people work there at different times of the day. I'm not sure when that occurs, but, like that, it's a different model, right? Like it's but I guess to your point is, I go, did you hear the interview with Elon the other day when he was
smoking up? Which interview?
I don't know. I mean, I don't recall what he was doing, but I think he was talking to him anyway.
Well, if you're talking about the Joe Rogan podcast, then yeah, I can definitely confirm he was smoking weed on it. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, I think that's what I'm getting at. Yeah, that's it.
But no, I didn't watch it much more than the highlights. What was he talking about?
Well, I never was a fan of his. If you're listening, Elon, which I'm sure he is, like, look, sorry, buddy, I wasn't a fan. But after that interview, I really came away going, that is a thoughtful dude. And one of the things he said is, look, we're going to move to it's a very simple model. Yeah, we can't store electricity yet as well as we'd like to, but we're going to do things like you're going to cool your house down. Like your house is going to know when your car is approaching. So you're going to have an app on your phone that's going to tell your house, yeah, I've left work, cool it down, and cool it down early. Like while all that solar is pumping along, let's absolutely turn the air conditioners on full mach. Right. And cool our house down, and then we can shut them off at 4:30 when the solar panels start to taper off and your house is already cooled. And hopefully your builders, if you're listening, builders, you've built a house which retains that cool air and doesn't lose it all, and that shifts the demand a little bit. So and then your hot water turns on maybe in the middle of the day instead of currently. I think it turns on at night in South Australia, which always made sense because that was when energy was the cheapest, because the coal-fired power stations, chugging, it doesn't like to turn on or off, right?
Right.
So at nighttime when no other demand is, well, if you get your hot water and you heat it up then, that makes a lot of sense because there's it's cheaper. It makes more sense. It's a better time to do it. The opposite may be true in the future. It may be more true to heat your water in the middle of the day. And
I would argue that the opposite is true regardless. You're sort of coming at it from an energy perspective, but from a consumer's point of view, and I've been in this scenario where you've got an off-peak hot water system, and we used to install them, and they were ridiculous because people get home from work, they want to have a shower, the hot water runs out, and they've got to wait for 2 hours for the hot water to replenish.
So who's the engineer that thought that one up? We should find them.
I know. But now, that was sort of relevant when we were talking about storage, hot water heaters, and that kind of stuff. And now we're sort of going down the path of, well, okay, we're not so much about storage these days. It's more storage heaters. It's more about what do they call it? your hot water heater, instantaneous sort of stuff. So, supply and demand. Okay, we need hot water, bang, turn the tap on, hot water suddenly gets generated and delivered to your tap. So, yeah, I don't know how common that off-peak model is these days, but I get it from an energy point of view. It makes sense.
Yeah, and I think, and with solar, you can also do hot water as well. Like you can do thermal solar, where you basically just boil water and that creates energy as well. And you can do different things around that technology. Like the thing. This is why I'm like, when people try to pick their favorite technology and call it a winner, whether it be coal, whether it be solar, whether it be whatever, I go, you know what? You're smarter than me. There's so many different technological solutions out there. My only caveat is like, make sure you get the mix right. Do you know what I mean? Like put the right pieces together. That's including building the house. And then if we're going to keep going with this grid model, well, then making sure you've got things you got consistency of supply. It can be there day and night, and it's basically the most cost effective. Like, again, that's why I was saying I liked water. I know, not everyone's a big fan of dams and that kind of stuff. Like there's another environmental impact there. But what I loved about water is that, like, say you fire up a desalination plant in the middle of the day, which creates a demand for solar power. You desalinate a whole bunch of water, and that's an energy intensive thing to do. So it's not efficient, but again, you don't care because you're like, whatever, I got lots of energy here, give her. And then you take that water that you desalinated, you pump it up a hill, you leave it in a freshwater lake. Maybe, you go for a swim, whatever. It's great. And then you can throw it back downhill when you need it.
Right.
That's a pretty good model. Like, it doesn't sound cheap,
Right.
like there's a lot of money involved in creating that little scenario there. But it's from a societal point of view, it's pretty cool. Like it's got a lot of value there. So it'll be interesting to see whether we go towards those kinds of models.
It raises a good point as well. I mean, do you invest in something like that that's potentially quite an expensive comparison to, what we traditionally do, which doesn't work either, by the way. Like you build a dam, we need more water, increase the dam wall, like which is ridiculous.
I thought you were going to say what we traditionally, how we would keep replacing prime ministers and we spend all our money advertising for elections and doing bullshit things.
Yeah, I'm not getting into that. But I mean, when you look at some of the solution or potential solutions anyway, and I don't know what the answer is, but when you go up to North Queensland, for 6 months of the year, it doesn't stop raining and all that water goes straight up to the ocean. You think, well, if we'd invest in some sort of infrastructure that could, potentially deliver that water to parts of Australia that actually need it instead of going straight up to the ocean, I mean, what impact would that have?
Yeah, and that goes back to grid, and you can put in these big things called a DC cable, which is you don't lose so much energy and you can transport it long distances and that kind of stuff. And maybe that would be pretty cool. It's really interesting. And I think the future is a mix of like localized technology, housing developments, and also grid developments. Because I don't know that you want to get away with no grid. There could be a future. Again, what fascinates me is what are the Indians going to do? Because like they're going to have to meet massive growing demand, right? With as little money as possible. Do you know what I mean? And so will they invest in building a massive grid, or will they just try to do something different and something really creative? And now I'm fascinated by that. I don't know what the answer is, but I just think it'd be interesting.
Yeah, I'm pretty interested to see the development of the community side of things. I mean, you look at, like you were saying, in some of these rural places around the planet, country, Africa, India, Australia even, where, they're sort of out in the bush and they're not close to the resources that we take for granted every day, power, electricity, water, blah, blah, blah. And I think some of those initiatives that they're building on a community/society scale are quite, I suppose, revolutionary, and they're kind of paving the way for what could potentially be a massive footprint, looking forward. Yeah, and I think that's kind of the idea as well. They're sort of like, well, we'll test it out here, see how it goes, and if it works, and we might talk about it on a more of a macro level.
Yeah, and places like Flinders Island, like there's places, Australia may pioneer all the technology, and we can maybe do it here because it costs a bit of money, right? Like, how when you first do anything, like, your flat screen TV costs $6,000 originally. Now it's, $800 at Aldi. Like a country like Australia is a great place to test. This is what I was saying. I think we're going to do a lot of world firsts here. We're probably going to do it expensive because that's kind of how we do things.
That's how we roll.
That's how we roll. But then people are going to learn what we did, and the cost is going to come down. And it's going to be fat. It's going to be a great future, I think. And cheap free energy means, you can do a lot of other cool shit, right?
Yeah. I think what's likely is we'll develop it and we'll get it to a point where it's amazing, and then we'll sell it to someone else and then have to buy it back off them.
Yeah, that's
good at.
Well, that's our thing, right? That's our thing. No, it's we are the lucky country. We do have lots of. I mean, you talk about, you got lots of wind in the roaring 40s and stuff like that. Like Tasmania, they've got lots of wind farms down there. They smash along South Australia, and then your solar resources are huge.
Yeah.
And we do have water. Like, yeah, there's water up in the north. There's water in the Snowies. You could do localized water, like in lots of different places. So there's going to be so many different and then there's going to be so much different technology. And then you flip that around and you go, you know what? If you builders out there can build the houses right, then how much energy am I going to have to use? Like, if all my appliances are going to use less and less energy and get smarter about it, and then cooling and heating my house is not as intensive. Like, I was in let's call it a district of the CBD recently, and I'd love to find the engineer who designed these buildings and stick him in the middle of the wind tunnel that exists between the two, these buildings. It's in and out. It's shit. Like, it's horrific. Like, whoever built this has less, thoughts than a guy who built a 14th century town in the Middle East, where they build in shade and they think about the wind and they think about all these elements, whereas we think of nothing.
Well, I mean, that's not a secret to anyone. I mean, you can look at modern day architecture and compare it to 15th, 16th century constructions where they built it basically with all with their hands, and you think, wow. Like, but it's a different model as well. Like, now things are sort of designed; they need to be done, faster, and it's just the way it is. But I mean, I think
better apprentices. Is that why?
Say again.
They had better apprentices back then. Is that what it was?
Maybe. But I mean, it raises a good point, and we're sort of, you're joking about, the builders building the right things, but at the end of the day, the builders are told, at the end of the day, the client has to pay for things. And when we live in a society when, these alternative solutions may cost more, then ultimately it's not up to the builder. They just basically have to do with what's within the budget. So I like to think that as, these solutions become more and more common and a bit more advanced, and technology evolves and blah, 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 then, the costs come down, it becomes more affordable. Maybe the government steps in, creates some more rebates or whatever that might look like. But then, if it does become more commonplace.
Yeah. And just to wrap up, like, that's perfect. And if your listeners understand what it's like to be an energy trader, it's exactly the same answer. Like, it's what is everyone willing to pay for, right? Because again, like, as you say about the house, like, you can put any kind of technology, all the coolest stuff in the face of the earth into this house, but the client has to be willing to pay. Do you know what I mean? Because the technology costs what it costs, and the building materials cost what they cost.
Yeah.
And you build according to what the person wants and how good they want to feel about their house. Well, the same is about the grid, right? The grid is based on society making decisions around all those things, and government, and you know what I mean, and who's willing to pay. And then you work within the constraints of that. You go, okay, well, we want it to be cheap, but we want it, in cycling, we always said you can pick, you can have cheap, light, or strong, and you can pick two.
Yeah, that's right.
You can never have all three. You can only pick two of those.
Yeah.
And I just think that's almost an immutable law of things. You know what I mean?
It's funny you said that. It literally came up in a book I'm reading at the moment. Exact line.
Yeah.
All right. Well, look, Andrew, let's wrap this up. I just want to throw it out to the listeners out there, though. If you guys have any experience with this sort of thing that we've been speaking about, so whether you've got any takes on the current model or any of these disruptions that are coming out in the space of storage or solar or wind farms or whatever that might look like, government subsidies, blah, blah, blah. I'd love to know if you guys have been affected in any way, or if you've built a business model around that, because I really do think that it is a extremely exciting future when you talk about these things. If you guys have any experience with anything on the community level or maybe on the grid level, that'd be great as well. By all means, we want to hear more about this sort of thing. So you can head across to the private Facebook group, which is on Facebook. You can get to that through the siteshed.com. There's a link on the homepage there, which will take you across to that. Andrew's in that group as well. So if you've got any questions, by all means, you can ask when this episode comes out, and we will get them answered. I am going to be doing some follow-up episodes or some further episodes with some other people within the same space. So it's going to be an exciting conversation, and I hope you guys enjoy listening to it as much as I'm enjoying creating it. Andrew, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, no worries. And as I say, if there are any questions or you want to, I love to talk. Once I start my new job, I'll probably have to, get clearance on what I can say and not say. But I'm happy to answer questions if there's more questions out there on that. Because I find this topic as a person, like I'm all about this. It's just fascinating to me. It's just a neat time to be in this space because it's no one really knows the answers yet. But it's really cool.
Oh, man, I think the future of it's so exciting, and it opens up so many possibilities to the listeners out there, the guys that are in the building space, the guys that are in the plumbing space, the guys that are in the air conditioning, cooling, the electricians. Man, like, imagine being an electrician today. Like, there's so many cool things coming out in the solar space and like the renewable, sustainable energy. Like, there's so many little niches and verticals that are going to be created through the evolution of what we're seeing today in the energy field. I think it's just going to be such an amazing, next decade, and see what. I can't wait to see what comes out of it.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, buddy.
Absolutely. And we'll just leave it at that. So that is a wrap. Thank you for listening to another episode of Toolbox Talks. If you're liking what you hear, then you can head across to thesiteshed.com where you can join our community by signing up to our Toolbox Talks. You'll get sent a weekly notification, which is basically a highlight of everything that we've spoken about during that week, along with any other industry news that may be relevant or specific to the trades. If you're enjoying the show, you can head across to iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, where you can leave us a review. That would be fantastic, and all the reviews get read out in the show. Likewise, if you have any friends or colleagues that you think would benefit from the show and the episodes that we create, then please go ahead and share it with them.